Okay, I know it's been 3 weeks, but where did we leave off? Do you remember?
Jesus.
We are so far from Jesus now. What's that? Turn the Nile into blood. So we got through one plague, the end of chapter 7. You know, I'm going to back up a little bit because I was watching some videos during this time that I've been off and stuff, and one of the guys that I kind of listen to, so don't take this as like but is Dennis Prager, because he's a Jewish, not a Messianic Jew, but he is Jewish and he does know his Torah and his Old Testament. And he thought, and it didn't even occur to me whenever we were going through the plagues of turning the water to blood. He finds this part one of the funniest parts of the Old Testament. He says, because here you have God just turned all the water to blood, and then the magicians come up and go, hey Pharaoh, we can do the same thing. And Pharaoh's looking at maybe this is the last little bit of water they had and go, really, you fools? This is all we got now. You can do the same thing. You know, you just like wasted all of our water. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that one. But let me say, there's a lot of funny things when we get into these stories. It could probably even go way deeper than what we're going to go. There is a lot in the plagues that we're going to get into. So we've done the first one. And we're going to try to hit maybe chapters 8 and 9 today. I don't know if we'll get through it, but we'll see. One of the things, though, I wanted you to realize is, as we go through this, there's a lot of patterns as we get into these plagues. And one of the patterns that we'll see is that there's 10 plagues, but the first 9 are broken into 3s. And what always happens is, Moses comes to Pharaoh, gives him a warning. Moses goes to Pharaoh, gives him a warning. No warning. And then that pattern repeats the next two sets. The other pattern that is Moses will always go to Pharaoh by the water first, and then he goes and visits him in like maybe his palace, and then nothing. So we also see that pattern happening. So there's all kinds of patterns that are going on throughout this program or throughout this process. And the other thing we also need to understand is that what God is about to do, he's basically undoing a little bit of creation in this whole story. He's taking what he has already done starting in Genesis, and he kind of backwards does the whole undoing of creation to kind of reset things. And he's using this one region to make that point, because we get from blood or the water to blood. And then the very last one before the big one, number 10 is in this category all of its own. Okay, at 9, we get to darkness. Because darkness was the very first thing that happened at creation. So he's going from kind of backwards and resetting the whole thing. So kind of find that interesting. Now, before we get moving, I found this very interesting. Are the plagues literal or symbolic?
Both.
Yeah. Okay, they're very much literal. But there are some people who believe they're only symbolic. And that is, do not even think that. Okay, these are actual physical events that take place. They're not just stories.
I don't think Pharaoh would have let the people go.
Yeah, had they not been,
a kindergarten class.
Yeah, exactly. And also keep in mind that what we're going to go through here is a picture symbolically of things to come. This is not the end of it. God is almost showing us a very small picture of what transpires at the end. So what we're going to see regional is going to be almost worldwide later on when you get to the end of the book. So we're not done with what's going on. God is just showing us a little bit of who he is. Now, the other thing we'll say about these plagues, and a lot of people want to say this, that these are all just natural occurrences. We covered it just maybe a little bit. These are not natural occurrences. God uses natural things, natural things he'll use his nature, but he just exponentially makes it so much bigger than what nature would do by itself. And also keep in mind, everything is done at a specific time. Nature doesn't work that way. Nature doesn't necessarily listen to us when disasters come. But what we'll see through these stories is that Moses and God start it at a specific time and end it at a specific time. Nature doesn't do that by command. Okay? So we know that God is actively involved in this, but there are people who will say that this is a natural phenomenon. Okay? Which, yes, it is, but it's not. Okay? You know, and the other thing I thought funny, the people that that take these as literal, there are some scholars who will take this as literal, but then they'll go to Revelation and say, oh, that's symbolic. You can't do that. If this is literal, then we're going to take Revelation literal. Okay? That's how God works. God doesn't just say, oh, yeah, this was real, but this one over here is not. No. If God does it in one place, he will do it again in another. So when you're reading through Scripture and these signs and wonders happen, God is moving, and it's literal. Okay? So let's keep that in mind as we go through this. Now, I'm going to fast forward just a bit because we're going to see in chapter 10 what the divine purpose of all of this is. What is the divine purpose of all of these plagues?
Show God's glory.
Show God's glory. That's definitely one of them, yeah.
His judgment against all the false gods.
Justice is coming.
Yeah. So you're all correct, but specifically what he says in chapter 10, he goes, I'm going to do this so Egypt will know who I am. But more importantly, Israel's going to know who I am. And you're going to share this from generation to generation to generation. Okay? This was for God's glory to reveal himself to his own people and to a Gentile nation. He's revealing himself through this. It's hard to imagine, if we're going through this, that God is bringing complete judgment on a nation to reveal himself. I mean, that's pretty harsh, don't you think? Because he is bringing death, he's bringing all kinds of things to a nation just to reveal himself. Couldn't he have done it another way?
Well, he's bringing judgment, but he's also bringing election. He's bringing to his people what he chose for his own purposes from the beginning of time. And he's starting this huge process that's going to end up with them being glorified because they come to Christ and because they know him and he knows them. And that's this incredible story that's being told.
Absolutely. You know, and it's interesting that through this story, you're going to see that God favors one nation above another. That's kind of hard to take in and to really believe and realize this. But God does favor one nation over another.
Yeah, but he also judges them very small. He deals with them, he disciplines them, he does terrible things to them, but he also loves them.
Okay, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So Egypt is going to pay a very high price for their sins, their not acknowledging God, for not acknowledging his people, for not letting his people go to worship him. They're going to pay a high price. God was very specific on what he wanted them to do. So with that being said,
I see a real parallel to our current situation.
that's right where I was going.
I was thinking it.
I mean, geez, what kind of mess are we in because our Pharaoh, in quotes, doesn't acknowledge God?
And I'm going to take it one even step further. There's a lot of pharaohs who do not acknowledge God.
Right.
You know, because one of the biggest questions that I probably get is how, as Christians, and it's kind of timely that we're getting into this because we're a month away from election. You know, how as Christians are we supposed to interact with this whole idea of government and voting, and does God want us to do this? How does God want us to do this? I am not making this a political statement by no means. I'm not telling anybody who to vote for. That is not what I'm here for. What I am trying to figure out is, and talk with everybody about, is what is our role in it? How do we interact with it? What is the godly form of doing this? Because I have people on one side who say they're more on they just can't get involved in this because they don't feel it's right to do so. And then we've got someone on even the far right that actually goes and thinks that someone is almost higher than God to an extent, you know, to put into office. there's got to be some way in the middle as Christians, and what are we supposed to be doing?
We should be using our logic and educating ourselves. Our Constitution, our Declaration is rooted in belief in Jesus Christ. And if you are not exercising your self-evident truths and sharing those with your neighbors and constantly, interacting them and behaving in a way that's worthy of Christ Jesus, I mean, that's what you should be doing. That's how you should interact with it. And folks who are, seemingly maybe on the fence, struggling, share your thoughts, share your viewpoint. They see that in your life every day.
That's good. Yeah, because sharing is a big deal. Voting is one thing, but sharing things with people is definitely a different way of doing things as well. Let me ask you this. Do you believe America's been blessed this 200 plus years?
Yeah,
Why?
because we honored God. We remembered Him. And the Bible tells us if you remember God, He will bless you.
How have we honored God?
Well, we supported Israel.
Go back to supporting Israel.
And then the way the
The
nation.
Constitution, the highest law is framed from biblical principles.
Well, we've honored him, but we've also dishonored him.
No, I'm not. We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
I'm just saying for the last 200 years, compared to all these other countries, it's hard to say we have not been blessed as a nation.
And our form of leadership, right? Not limiting people to reading the Bible, enabling people to have freedom. Christianity is very much liberating once you come into the understanding of, like we said, the self-evident truths. I think you said it
Families
framing
and
the
how they treat
Constitution.
women versus
Yeah.
how the freedoms that women have here to go to do all these things, that to have an education, it's dramatically different.
One of the statements that I heard that really resonated was God chose Israel, America chose God.
Interesting. So, and I say this because I know it can be a very polarizing thing, depending on where you stand on Christianity, and I mean, there's a lot of different areas on where you stand. But you cannot argue that God has blessed America, mainly because in the beginning we did put principles of His in place in this country, and that we have kept them for a long time. And when we follow God's ways and we follow God's laws and we do those things, supporting Israel is up there, we're going to be blessed by God. Now, fast forward now, and we start seeing, in the 60s I think it was when prayer was taken out of school. We start seeing some of God's ways and God's laws being completely reversed. We used to hold marriage between a man and a woman very high in this country. That has been reversed. We used to hold sexuality or even our gender identity at a very high level. We have since reduced that. This is not man's things. These are God's ways. And when we remove God's ways from a country, what do you think is going to happen?
We won't have freedom. We won't have this country because the Constitution is designed around Christianity and freedom. If you remove Christianity from the country and the people, our country is for the people and by the people, right? We don't have a pharaoh. We have an elected person who represents our best interests. So when we remove our beliefs that are rooted in the Bible, then we no longer have that.
Kind of feels like we're being punished at sometimes.
Do what?
Sometimes it feels like we're being punished.
We're right in the middle of it. We absolutely are. When God takes His hands off of things, that's what's going to happen. That's the natural way of things that are going to occur when we start taking God out of things, and He's going to say, okay.
We lost our ways.
So that's kind of where I was going back. How are we interacting? Because it is part of our ways to stand up for God's laws. So when we vote and when we do things, we are doing so as a voice for God, saying this is going to be our stance. This is the line that we won't cross. Even if the rest of the population wants to go that way, perfectly fine.
But if we don't, we're going to come under redemptive judgment. And He's going to hold the church somewhat responsible and the non-believers very responsible for everything, for what they do that's against His will.
Absolutely. And to think, so I'm kind of tying this back to Egypt. If we take God out, and if we know that God favors one nation over another, holy cow, what is that going to do to America? Now, I'm going to cheat here. We're going that direction. There's no getting around it. But that doesn't mean that we don't stand up for God's ways as Christians.
I think we've crossed the city limit sign.
Yeah.
We're not just headed that way, we're there.
So I do think we, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, there's also the scripture that says judgment begins at the house of God. He's gonna hold us accountable in some way.
Absolutely. I mean, I know this is a heavy subject, probably not one everybody wanted to get, talk about today. But we do see through this story that God favors nations over others based upon certain things. And we need to look at America as within that parameter. Okay? And to be honest with you, we're in this boat right now because Christians don't stand up. We haven't stood up. There was a whole generation of time where it was best just to be quiet and not share anything politically. And a lot of us grew up in that area. There's two things you don't talk about at the table with friends: politics and religion. Why not? We should have been. That's what got us here to begin with. And now we're trying to play catch up, and it looks like we're horrible. So we've done this to ourselves to a degree.
Well said.
There's a silent majority, though, I would say. There's people that are afraid to speak out but are silent, and when it comes time to vote, you see them because they're afraid to speak out.
Absolutely.
They're persecuted.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So,
What would have happened if Moses had been afraid to speak out?
it wouldn't have been
Well, he
good.
was.
In the beginning. God's like, buddy.
I mean, God would have brought about that to another.
God's ways are going to happen, which gets me to my next point. Have you ever heard, or maybe you've been taught, or maybe you still believe this, that God does things or allows things for our benefit?
Oh, yes, of course.
Our benefit and our discipline.
Okay, I'm going to say this. That is 100% wrong. Because God does nothing necessarily for our own benefit. He does it for His.
Oh, well said. Yeah.
Everything that happens in this world, in the country, in our personal lives, to your own health, to whatever's going on, it's for His purpose, not yours, not mine.
Yeah, remove yourself from that picture and it's a totally different meaning, right?
Absolutely it is. So for whatever, now I'm not saying God doesn't bless you or do things through those times, but we need to remember that whatever happens in this world, in your lives, everything is for God's purpose.
Isn't that Romans 8:20, 8:28, or is it 8:23? All things work together
for
for
the
the glory of God.
for the not
We've
ours.
been called according to His purpose.
That's exactly right. And I'm trying to set the stage here that God is the focal point, not us. It's Him. And when we have that mindset moving forward in our lives, hopefully it'll kind of help us live through this chaos that we're going through.
You could almost say that there are plagues that happen here, and as we're reading, you could say there's many plagues that are happening today.
Oh, buddy. And we haven't even seen them. They're coming. I mean, somebody correlated the plagues with even just natural disasters within America. God can use natural disasters for His punishment. This whole Helena thing is incredible if you've been paying attention. It's horrible. You had Mount St. Helens many years ago that killed a ton of things. You've got earthquakes through this country where, who's to say that's not God's doing judgment upon the land and upon the people?
I'm not.
Don't take that away, because God uses natural things, as we're going to see, to bring glory to Himself. 9/11, horrible event. What transpired right after that? You remember?
Churches swelled and they went back to normal.
Yeah,
2 weeks.
it swelled, and then everything just kind of went back to the way it was. But there was this small blip in time where it kind of reawakened and kind of got people's picture again. But they're no different than Pharaoh. God got Pharaoh's attention, and then he went right back to where he was.
We were watching a show last night, and it was about the tsunami that happened in 2004.
Yeah.
And how many people were killed, and we were just looking at natural disasters after that, and that killed like
260,000.
and that wasn't even in the top 10.
Wow.
But then it showed people that went over and started ministries, you know, in a Buddhist country trying to, because they were so traumatized by that, they wanted to go back and help. And then they started ministry, and I could see how God could totally maybe start working in that natural disaster through those people. And then I also read something that said Christians read the Bible because they believe in the Lord, and those who don't read the Bible read us.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. That's good.
Pretty-
Okay.
Ryan was different than COVID too, as people couldn't come to church practically,
Ooh.
and many have never recovered.
Mhm.
Some churches have gone away, especially rural churches, really.
Some people have gone away
Yes.
who've never returned. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, I'm kind of setting the stage. Let's get into the plagues. We're going to start with chapter 8, verse 1, and let's read the first plague or the second plague. Let's read 1 through 15. Would somebody like to read that one? Vicky, I guess you're on one.
We can start at 25 or more.
Oh yeah, you can start at 25. That's good.
7 days passed after the Lord struck the Nile. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'This is what the Lord says, let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will plague your whole country with frogs. The Nile will teem with frogs. They will come up into your palace, in your bedroom, and onto your bed, and into the houses of your officials, and on your people, and into your ovens and kneading troughs. The frogs will go up on you and your people and all your officials.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'Tell Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the streams and canals and ponds, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt.' So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land. But the magicians did the same thing by their secret arts. They also made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, 'Pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let your people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord.' Moses said to Pharaoh, 'I leave to you the honor of setting the time for me to pray for you and your officials and your people, that you and your houses may be rid of the frogs, except for those that remain in the Nile.' 'Tomorrow,' Pharaoh said. Moses replied, 'It will be as you say, so that you may know there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs will leave you and your houses, your officials, and your people. They will remain only in the Nile.' After Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh, Moses cried out to the Lord about the frogs he had brought on Pharaoh. And the Lord did what Moses asked. The frogs died in the houses and in the courtyards and in the fields. They were piled into heaps, and the land reeked of them. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said."
Okay, I have to say, this is one of my funniest things. This whole land is filled with frogs. In the beds, everywhere. Moses goes to Pharaoh and goes, "Hey, you set the time." Well, Pharaoh's like, tomorrow. I like sleeping in the frogs tonight, so can you just take it away tomorrow? I'm like, why not take it away immediately? I was like, what? But anyway, it just made me laugh when I
There's
read
an
it.
old hymn that used to be sung for invitation time. Oh, why not tonight?
Mm.
A lot of
Yeah,
people say, well, I'll take care of Jesus when I get a little older. I'll do it tomorrow.
yeah, I need to get things right. Yeah. Okay, so what are some things that you see in this before we kind of start breaking it down?
Well, David Copperfield back then, apparently you can make frogs appear, you know. I didn't know that they were that skilled back then, but yeah.
Okay, well, let's speak on that. We spoke on that a little bit on the Nile because they were able to turn water into blood. So how was it again that they were able to bring frogs out? Was this a sleight of hand, David Copperfield, or was it something else?
It's secret arts. Secret arts.
Yeah.
Was it demonic?
This is magic. This is demonic. Okay, this was not some David Copperfield, something hidden behind a curtain and then revealed. They were leaning on and worshiping demonic spirits to cause an event like this to occur. Okay? So I want to make sure we understand that, because what they're worshiping are demonic spirits. Okay? With every single plague, and this is debated, but I can definitely get on the bandwagon with this one, that every plague was going against a god of Egypt. Okay? That wasn't the ultimate goal. That's just how God decided to do it. The ultimate goal, remember, is for his purpose, for his glory, okay, and to be shown. But he's using other ways to also attack. So, yeah, so they were worshiping demonic things. So what else do you see in here?
So I got a question. So in the river to blood and the frogs, was that in Goshen as well?
That's a good question.
I don't think it was. I don't think it was either, but
Well-
we'll come up here and see in just a second.
So the question is, so if it was in Goshen, that means it affected the Israelites. What I find interesting is, though, we don't get to a certain point until then God says it doesn't affect Israel.
Correct.
As of right now, he is not saying this.
Correct.
No, it is actually said, it'll be the frogs will, or it's not exactly frogs, it's like marsh climbers or jumpers. That's what it says. It needs to be a dot, and it's surrounding their territories, all their territories, not the land. It's the Egyptians, like Mizraim's territories.
Oh,
So,
can you see?
Frogs, toads.
No, I mean, so the frogs, there's the frogs there in Israel, or in Egypt, are about like this big. I mean, if we want to, they seem like frogs with where they're going. I don't know. I wasn't there.
And they're sacred.
They are sacred. The fact that they have a God dedicated to this lets me know that there is something about it. So it could be in multiple ways. I mean, this was a long time ago, so it could have been something I don't know. But I'm going to lean and say that it probably did impact Israel at this time, only because he doesn't say otherwise. Now, we could also say on the other side that if Israel wasn't affected by the other ones, then we could also say that they weren't impacted here. But ultimately, we don't know.
Well, it says the Egyptians were digging for water along the Nile because they couldn't drink the water, and if Goshen had water to slaves, they could have just gone and taken the water from the slaves, so.
That's good.
Seems like that alternative was taken away.
Good point.
This also shows that demons can imitate God.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
cannot remove the frogs, they cannot change.
Absolutely. Oh, we're going to see demonic forces imitate God in Revelation when you go back and read through that.
In 2 Timothy 3, Paul is referring to these two men, Janus and Jambres. He names them. And he says that in the end times, we're going to see exactly the sort of thing that they did. So we will see, as the scripture says, signs and lying wonders that will deceive people.
No, absolutely. So this won't be the last time we see this, and there will be a lot of people deceived by what people are going to be able to do. You know, so, and that's why I'm very careful when you start seeing miracles happen. You better judge it. You better test it, because sometimes it's not God, just because it happens. Okay? So let me ask you, why frogs?
well, it was by an abundance of them, obviously, and they were worshiping them.
Yeah, they worship.
Yeah, they were worshipped. They were a symbol of fertility in Egypt.
Not rabbits.
No, that's ours.
So were all these plagues associated to the gods, the individual gods? Okay, I'm just now getting this, sorry.
No, yeah, because I've got one for each one of them. I've got a slide for each plague with the god.
I think
Yeah,
this strongly goes back to the sons of God, discussion we had a few months back.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Is it Psalm, which is the Psalm of Judgment, Psalm 83, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Where it talks about the judgment of these sons of God.
Yep.
That will die like men.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so all of this is connected, and that's why these are all demonic in nature. Now, frogs also get a little more personal than the Nile. Now it's touching them. Now it's part of their lives. Now they're being inconvenienced by just their sleep patterns and whatever the case may be. Okay, so now they're individual. I'm not saying that the water didn't impact their lives. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, come on, who wants to go to bed with frogs?
And also, maybe they've never seen their perceived God interacting with them before, as you said, and now they're literally burdened by it. So perhaps they're coming to the realization, like, oh, this isn't a God, it's an animal. It's and asking questions about their situation. Why would my God do this?
Or why would my God not take it away?
So instead of worshiping, there will be an aversion towards their own gods.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's funny is the god is Heket, the wife of the great god Kumnam, who is believed to form man out of clay and breathe life into them. So all this whole family is being under attack.
When Pharaoh's
and what
not
they're
telling all the people, like, hey, everybody, if they take again, there's gonna be some frogs, but I don't believe it. I mean, these people are reacting to what the heck's going on, right?
Yeah, and we're going to see a little revolt later on
Yeah.
as we read. Yeah,
He only has him and his cronies are only the ones who kind of know.
and his sorcerers and
Yeah.
people around him. Yeah, that's exactly right. So the Nile frog is pretty small. They can barely leap or hop. What's funny is I was trying to find the sound, but they're known for generating the most obnoxious, never-ending croak. Okay, have you ever? So I have a pond in my backyard. When I try to go to sleep at night, there's like once or twice during the summer, a frog will make its way in there. One frog, and it annoys the living thing out of me. And it wakes me up to where I have to go get it. I won't sleep until I get that frog. One frog out of a pond that's outside.
His jammies.
Maybe God's
It's not a plague, it's one frog.
That's what I'm
But
doing.
I can't imagine though having your whole house run through this and having that sound going on. It's horrible. Okay?
all die.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that here in a second. Good.
That squeak in your car and you don't want, you gotta find it, because you can't drive anymore, it's very crazy.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
There's a bunch of French guys came through Egypt.
See, and it's funny that you see frogs also on their headdresses. What's funny, I think it's funny because they don't see frogs on their headdresses. What do you see on their headdresses? Snakes. What's food for snake? Frogs. So it's almost kind of like all this is tied together with everything that they believe. Okay. So, and what's the command that God has given them? What's the command that He's given Pharaoh?
Let my people go.
And
Worship.
don't forget that. Okay. The Ten Commandments got it wrong. Moses didn't say, let my people go. He said, look, let my people go so that they may come and worship me. That's the point of this.
Same message each time.
Each time. The message doesn't change. Okay? And it's like, let my people go. What we're going to see here later on is that Pharaoh starts giving some concessions, saying, hey, instead of all of that, how about you just do this? And he does this 4 times. Okay? Which we'll get to.
Also, it seems like everything's more aggravated.
It is.
And he's really pushing Pharaoh and saying, are you gonna do what I'm asking you to do? And he makes it a little bit harder and a little bit harder every time.
I was gonna say that too, Brittany. It seems like Pharaoh keeps moving the goalposts, so to say.
Yeah, he's doing it.
But God is very patient. He continues to create another interaction.
Yeah, no, you're right. So now, something to keep in mind is Satan's power does not generally work for the good of mankind, but very destructive. Okay, God works in destructive, but it's also good for mankind. If you want to try to add on to that, Satan will not do that. Satan may make it look that way. He's very tricky when it comes to all that. What he can't do though is undo what God has already done. So because God caused this, the magicians had, like you said, had no power to remove it. This is beyond them. Okay? So,
Yeah, this also too, I think something that's amazing about this is the impact on the Jews. Because the Jews are looking, excuse me, at what their God is doing to Pharaoh and Egypt. And they're more and more recognizing, we gotta be serious about God. I mean, look what he's doing to these people. And he's doing it for us. It's kind of amazing.
yeah, no, absolutely. So, frogs come, some time passes, and I want to say that when I looked into kind of when this happened, I want to say it was that typically the frogs would be in the fall. I'd say many believe that this happened in the fall of when all of this transpired. So I tried to put a timeline into when this might happen. Some people think it was like very consecutive. Some think it took about a year for all this to occur. So Pharaoh had some time to really consider and make the right decision. Okay.
Then they gathered them in heaps and the land stank.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Oh my gosh.
Here we go.
Okay.
So Pharaoh then comes to realization that, hey, we got to do something. So he calls Moses and Aaron back in and he says, look, I need you to plead with your God. Okay. Not my God, not the God. I need you to plead with your God. Take it away. Moses comes, he says, okay, you pick the dime. It's not going to be me, you pick it. And he says, okay, let's do it tomorrow. Tomorrow comes, they're all dead. Yeah, and that is absolutely, you've got to think about this. This is disgusting. I don't know if I mentioned this about fish when we talked to the Nile. A bunch of dead carcasses on the streets and in heat, not a good thing. Okay? And they pile them all up into the heaps, great stench in the air and smell of decay. So when there's smell of decay and all this stuff going on, what typically is attracted by this?
Lies.
Oh, I wonder what's coming next. This is why some people will say this is all natural. Okay, that this one event caused another, which caused another, and so therefore this was more natural than it was God. Do not listen to that, because there is no way nature would have done the level that these caused. We've never seen a swarm of frogs like this ever.
Somehow Pharaoh just still hardens his heart. That's amazing to me. Like, hogwash. How can he not go, okay?
Yeah. We're going to get into the hardening of the heart here, and I think in a little bit. I think I put in here a little study on that because it's a little interesting. Okay, so we have the frogs. They're all piled up. They're all decaying. They're bringing their bulldozers, trying to get the frogs out. Okay, let's get to the last one. Let's go to the next one. Let's go 16 through 19. Okay, this is a small one. Somebody can read this.
So the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your rod and strike the dust of the land so that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and struck the dust of the earth, and it became lice on man and beast. All the dust of the land became lice throughout all of the land of Egypt. Now the magicians so worked with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there were lice on man and beast. Then the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had said.
Okay, so this is the last one of the first set. There is no warning. God tells Moses, this is what you're going to do, and Aaron, this is what you're going to do. Or actually, it's Aaron, because it's very interesting how the process works. First, it's kind of Aaron, then it goes into Moses, and then God just says it, kind of a deal. I mean, it's still some action. It's kind of interesting process.
Something I noticed from back, like I think in chapter 6, God told Moses, "Ye shall be God to Pharaoh, and Aaron will be your prophet." Now, Moses does the speaking and the declaration, and Aaron does the work. This big curl.
Absolutely, it is.
I don't know. We missed a couple of weeks, so you may have mentioned that.
Yeah, we did, and it's probably good to remind that, because it was funny, because when I was listening to Dennis Prager, he thought that prophets were someone who spoke into the future. And we're like, no, that's not what a prophet is. A prophet is just a messenger for God, a speaker, a doer, someone who's going to do something for God.
Some of it is predictive.
Some of it can be, absolutely, and I'm not taking that away, but that is not the sole point. But that's what we think it is, like a Nostradamus or that is not it. They are a messenger of God. They're hearing from God and doing what he tells them, but also sharing what has been given to them. Sometimes, it's like I said, it is predictive.
Forthtelling and foretelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's right, and we've said all along, this is kind of like a picture of Jesus, and all this, so all that kind of ties into play here. So anyway, we get to this next one, plague 3, strike the ground. We don't exactly, I know some versions say lice, some versions may say something else. Gnats. What we know is it is a very tiny little animal, or a little creature. Okay, how many of you had little gnats in your houses?
Oh, South Georgia's full of that.
Fruit flies. How annoying are those?
I think they should have left the frogs alive, because that would have made it.
It would have been food for them. Yeah.
They should have built on top of each other.
So, but no, I mean, think of the level of gnats that's on everybody and all the creatures, and it just swarms them. Okay, this is not natural. They're natural creatures, but it's not a natural event. So,
It's nasty.
If it is
I was expecting that from Mike, not you. You know?
if it is natural, Pharaoh would not call
You're a
Moses
plague,
to
Mike.
lift that up.
Yeah.
So he knows it.
Yeah, Pharaoh knows this is not natural. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Okay, this is something that is not regularly that happens in the area. And it's funny and when you kind of read in, it's kind of disgusting what these type of gnats are, because what they're attracted to is moisture. So they're attracted to your eyes, to your mouth, open wounds, things along those lines. And what they'll do is they'll lay larvae in it.
Oh, no, isn't it gross?
I'm telling you this, it's not just flying around, is what the picture that I'm trying to paint here.
And the magicians actually tried to replicate that.
And they couldn't.
Is there any reference to what the time frame is between when the frogs come and the gnats come? Is it overlapping? Is it?
It's not overlapping. I mean, I mean, some of it could be, but again, I tried and I couldn't find that. Mm-mm. I mean, you can kind of estimate on when a normal natural event like this might happen, and that's what some people tried to do, but I can't verify that.
You'd think that the frogs leaving and the smell and the stank, could be a short period of time that generates the gnats and the lice, opposed to after they got rid of it and it's cleared out and all that.
Very interesting. Yeah, could have been.
That's my
Did
theory.
they have a god that was the god of the nets?
And I would just argue the difference if they were separated, because if you had a natural thing that would attract the gnats, then you could say that's natural. If they're totally separated, then that's obvious God.
Yeah, absolutely. So I tend to believe that they were separate.
Yeah, don't overlook verse 17 where it says, Aaron stretched out his hand with his staff and struck the dust of the earth, and there were gnats on man and beast.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't say the gnats showed up on their own in multitudes. It says Aaron.
From the
triggered
dust,
event
they
from dust.
were created.
And that's the one that didn't have a warning? Is that the one you're
That's
saying?
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And Moses has a writing style, like if there's any gap in any of the Torah, he writes it like in the month of Tishri, in the month of Aviv. Like he gives the timing. When it is so quick, like he ignores writing those timings. So it looks like, it's like very sequential next to each other.
Mm.
I agree, it does seem like a very short timeline between plagues.
Yeah, it seems that way. I mean, we don't know, so I'm going to be open to whatever. Okay. What's very interesting to me, though, Egypt was known to be very monumental. Would you say? They were big into their monuments, right? Large statues, very big structures, large pyramids. What they're beaten by was something as small as a flea. Okay, and sometimes the god that's being attacked is not necessarily like that specific animal of a god. It's more of us who might control that realm. Okay, so for example, you got Geb, who's the earth god of ancient Egypt, and Set, the desert god of ancient Egypt. So you're going to see Set probably again, because they could be tied to multiple things because of what they were over. Okay, which is why they did this. The other one that could be involved is also Khepri, the god of creation, the renewal of life. These were just created out of nothing, out of dust. I mean, is what they were made for, or from.
So is he.
Or actually, that's flies. We'll go back to gnats.
Trees.
So anyway, so keep that in mind as we go through the gods. So,
I read a really interesting article about how, sure you all have heard about the World Economic Forum's Great Reset. Re and Set are two different Egyptian gods, Set being the god of chaos, actually. That there's some hidden meaning in that.
And Re's the sun god.
Yeah.
Yeah, which we're going to get to later. That's very interesting. So, what was Pharaoh's response to all this?
Nope, just kidding.
Yep. Hey, it went away. His heart was still hardened. No big deal. It's gone now. We can go back to our daily lives. Okay?
I think verse 19 is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Yeah.
The magicians are saying, hey, look, this is unique, this is the finger of God, and in mine, I'm assuming is Yahweh, with God with capital G, and yet he just doesn't listen.
So is the G-O-D capitalized? Or just the G?
No, sorry, it is just capital.
So,
G.
yeah, and because I think I wrote down here, so right now they're recognizing him as Elohim. They haven't gotten to the Yahweh part. They're going to, but they're saying, look, this God is like, this is the finger of Elohim. We can't do this. This is something bigger than us. But they at least recognize it. They're trying to, So they're going in the right direction.
But he has no regard at all for his people.
No. Well, think about because this is going to come into play in the 9th plague. Who was Pharaoh? He was a god. He's actually considered the son of Ra. That's what the Pharaoh is considered.
So he's an idol of Egypt.
Absolutely. He's an idol of himself, too. So this was a very prideful thing that was going on with Pharaoh. Someone was attacking him personally through all of these acts because he had no control over it.
If he bent his knee to these commands or these, here's how you can get out of this, he's recognizing that he's not God to all the people in the country. So he's got this huge arrogance about it.
Yeah,
the Pharaoh
absolutely.
before him was not as bad, right? I mean, the Pharaoh before him.
Well, there's been several pharaohs that are before him, but because this isn't like from Joseph right to him. So there have been many pharaohs in between. Enough 400 years of time have passed as before, a good pharaoh that we know of. So because Joseph's long forgotten at this point. Okay.
I do think it's interesting that the lice or gnats, whatever they were created from the dust, much like humans. From dust we came, to dust we shall return. And these evil men can't replicate it because evil
can't create. That's correct. And again, all these aspects have something to do with creation. So keep that in mind as we go here. God is kind of taking this whole creation thing and resetting things. Let's get to this last one because I do want to at least finish chapter 8 before we leave here. But the first thing I want to note, the first 3 plagues involve 3 areas of the ecosystem: water, land, and air. Okay, that's kind of what's being in control of here. So let's read this last section, 20 through 32. Anybody still like to read that section? I know it's long. Come on.
Okay. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Rise up early in the morning, present yourself to Pharaoh, and as he goes out to the water, and say to him, Thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. Or else, if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you and your servants and your people, and into your houses, and the houses of the Egyptians shall be filled with swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they stand. And on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people dwell, so that no swarms of flies shall be there, that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. Thus I will put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall happen." And the Lord did so. There came great swarms of flies in the house of Pharaoh and into the servants' houses. Throughout all the land of Egypt, the land was ruined by the swarm of flies. Keep going.
Finish the chapter.
Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, "Go sacrifice to your God within the land." But Moses said, "It would not be right to do so, for the offerings that we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God are an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God, as he tells us." So Pharaoh said, "I will let you go sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness. Only you must not go very far away. Plead for me." Then Moses said, "Behold, I am going out from you, and I will plead with the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. Only let not Pharaoh cheat again by not letting people go to the sacrifice to the Lord." So Moses went up from the Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord. And the Lord did as Moses asked, and removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also, and did not let the people go.
Okay. Anything in there that you?
I got a quick question. Mine says Jehovah in ASB, "Thus saith Jehovah," and then later on.
So what you're going to find is really if you go to, depending on what version you read. So if I'm reading the Legacy Standard, which actually is a pretty good version, It actually says Yahweh. The reason they say Lord, capital Lord, or Jehovah is because there's this whole mentality of there used to be you don't say God's name. And so therefore they changed his name to those to compensate because they did not want to, were unholy enough to say God. Well, that's not the case for us, okay? His name is Yahweh. So when you see the Jehovah, you can actually, that's going to be God's name is Yahweh.
Proxy almost.
Yeah, it's a
In a
placeholder.
way, no one knows how to pronounce the word because they don't have vowels. And the nikuds, the dots came pretty later in 2000 anomaly, I guess, back in those times.
But I'm going to say Yahweh. He knows what I'm trying to say.
I know.
You know, so I'm not.
You can take YHWH and you can pronounce that Jehovah. It's just,
Good.
it's just another way to say it, so that nobody knows exactly what.
Jehovah's the additional vowels.
It's actually,
Yeah.
Yeah, adds value.
the word
They have
Jehovah came from, with German background. So it has nothing to do with the Jewish background because they don't even have J.
Yep.
Didn't mean to bog down with things.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
One of the coolest things about this, one of the most important things that's huge, is that he's now distinguishing between the nations.
Oh,
Okay, I'm gonna hurt these people, but not that.
yeah. So
This
this.
makes me think about COVID, because COVID is a weird thing that nobody can figure out, and it hurt everybody in the world. And it makes me think that, and the looming towers, whole thing, that God is beginning to do things pointing toward the end, and they're gonna get more and more intense, and who knows, focused on one nation or another. Look what's happening in Israel right now.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
The fact that we don't know how much time spanned here, I mean, in my mind, we see, in Hollywood, oh, it all happens like within a day or a week, all these blood turns to, moon turns to blood, but it could happen over 100 years, we don't know.
Yeah. It's all in God's timing. But no, I mean, you're absolutely, we are seeing a common theme that I've said before. You're starting to see a separation and division again. God is now saying, I don't know really what transpired the previous ones, but now he is saying, these moving forward, basically, my people are not going to be affected by this. You are going to be. And that is going to cause a huge wedge between Egypt and Israel. Okay, so this only compounds the issues going on. And God knows it. Because now it's not just Pharaoh who sees this separation. The people see the separation. The people recognize that they're not being affected by these things. They are protected.
Dad likes us best.
When our gods can't protect us. Yeah. Kind of interesting. So pay attention to that.
Was it Pharaoh that came up with shoe fly, don't bother me?
Right. So same scenario this time. It's funny because this is the first plague in the second series. First plague in the first series. Where did Moses go to meet Pharaoh? By the water. He goes again by the water to where Pharaoh is and says, "This is what we're going to do here, dude. We're not changing anything. Let us go so that we may worship, or this is going to happen." What does he say?
Hogwash.
I think this is the same thing that we do when we wonder whether or not these things happen naturally or not. It is a hardening of our own hearts.
Yeah.
This is what Pharaoh's doing. He's seeing this stuff happen, and when it goes away, he doubts whether or not it was of God.
Can't be true.
It's also an interesting perspective of how supernatural it is. Like, you may think that God doesn't cause the things to work together unless you consent to it. But it's very clear here that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. He said it several times. The Lord caused Pharaoh's heart to be hardened. To me, it's a very explicit example that you are under the authority and what you said earlier.
Sovereignty.
It's for God's purpose, and you're very much a part of it.
It says Pharaoh hardened his heart. And there's a level that is very true. I mean, you can harden your heart against God only up to a certain factor. And then God begins to harden the heart even more so.
Yeah.
Because God knows, and in his sovereignty and in his creation, he knows that Pharaoh is going to go to this point.
Like, you can't escape his purpose. It's beautiful.
full of.
No, so a lot of people will say, well, did Pharaoh have an option? Well, yes, he did. Because God only was doing what was already in Pharaoh's heart. That was already within him and in his mind, in his heart. And God was like, okay, I'm gonna turn that over to you. But we're gonna get more into hardening when we get into chapter 10. So hold that thought. We're gonna dive into that. Okay? And I'm pausing for a while on that for a reason. So just table that and stay with me.
Now for this commercial break.
But I'm going to go back to this whole division and separation. So basically, Yahweh is showing his sovereignty this time, not only just over nature, because we saw the area, but now he's actually doing it over space and areas, because he's impacting certain areas and not other areas. So he's showing that he's able to do these individual areas, and so he has control over the whole sky and everything else. So his level, like as it says, this is getting bigger and grander. Okay, so he's showing that, and this is kind of showing that he is sovereign over the whole land of Egypt. So upon all these other gods, Yahweh is bigger than them, and there's nothing they can do to stop him. Okay, so he's showing that to them. Now, this idea of I say some of the separations. Because, you know, it's funny to me, this wedge that's happening between the two, as I said earlier, it was probably causing a big wedge between the Egyptians versus the Israelites. Why is this happening to them and not to me? Or why is this happening to us and not them? So there's all this ideas of happening, and this whole idea that unbelievers have, that we've been set apart, we've been separated, we've been divided. There is something special about God's children versus not God's children, okay? It's not that we are any better than the unbelievers. And we need to make sure we understand that. We are no better. The only reason that we are different is because of God's glory and God's sovereignty and God's grace and his mercy. Don't ever think that you alone are any better than any of the unbelievers out there, because we're not. But yet that's how the unbelievers think of us. They think that you consider yourself better than me. Why do they have that idea?
Well, some of us do give them that idea.
Yeah, let's not just forget that. Okay? But this whole idea that Yahweh has separated us from them, this separation and division, is a real thing. God does not just let anybody into his kingdom. It's very interesting. You know, we all want to be inclusive. We all want to be this, you know, bring everybody along and do all this, but that is not God. This whole idea that we have in this U.S. that we want to be inclusive and bring everybody in, and we just need to be loving to everybody, and just we need to accept people for who they are and what they do and all this stuff, that is not God's way.
Yeah.
And the more you think about that, the more humble you are and the more gracious and thankful you are for what God has
done for you. Absolutely.
Why me over somebody else?
Yeah.
We see the wheat and the tares. We see the sheep and the goats. We see it over and over throughout Scripture, this separation. And I think it's hard because we've been so brainwashed by our society to sometimes accept that. That's what's part of, you know, washing with the Word. When we expose ourselves over and over again to God's Word, it begins to unbrainwash us.
Yeah.
Romans 12, you know.
No, absolutely. You know, but people really struggle with this, and I believe this whole separation is what brings on the hatred of Christians. Because we have been called, we have been chosen by God, and the world and Satan does not like it. Does not like it, okay? So that hatred, that's a natural occurrence for the hatred that we're going to that we receive and are going to receive. Okay? So anyway, so you know, we're seeing that today, and this whole idea that we all are going to get to heaven one way or the other. You know, you just saw the Pope say that. I don't know if you paid attention to that.
Yeah.
He said to a Muslim, "There's many ways to God."
Why be a Catholic anymore?
Yeah, what's the point? I mean, we're seeing churches and whole situations, whole systems crumble because of that whole idea. There is one way to God. Allah will not get you to God. Buddha will not get you to God. Okay? And we need to be very strong on that. That sometimes people, that's hate, but it's the truth. truth is being attacked right now. We need to make sure we understand that. Okay? I know we're closing up. People are trying to get in here. So I do want to close. God does not tolerate everything. I want to make sure you understand that. He does not tolerate everything. God builds walls. Heaven has a wall around it, or the city does.
Well, God is orderly, right? Like he has a time and a place and a way that he does things, and we should follow that.
Yeah. There is a marriage between Jesus and the bride. If you're not the bride, you don't get in. Okay, so there is a separation. Now, Pharaoh, he gave the order for them to go sacrifice to Yahweh. Go do it. Hey, go to Elohim. But you got to do it within this land. And Moses says, hey, that is not going to work. Why is this not going to work for them? What they're going to sacrifice is an abominable to them. They're going to sacrifice cows or whatever God tells them to. That's not going to look good to the Egyptians, and Moses knows it. He said, so no, this isn't going to work. So anyway, so he says, yes, go ahead and go. Flies leave. Pharaoh goes, oh, relief is here. Nope, you're not going. And we will pause.
We got more to do.
Not a fly remained. I'm sorry, flies are the most annoying things in the world, and I love my bug assault gun. But they do not go away. So yes, you're absolutely correct. This shows that this was God all over. Any questions or thoughts before we close it? We will do chapter 9. Read through at least through the 9th plague. 10th, that's a whole other study. Okay? Any thoughts or prayer requests?